Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're broadcasting live today from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. We're here tonight for a wonderful reason, and that's to celebrate the publication of Old Winnipeg, A History in Pictures by Christine Hanlon. With more than 140 photographs, many of them seen here for the first time, Old Winnipeg, A History in Pictures is a true visual treat, offering a window into the past, showing life as it was, and stirring in us the emotions of wonder and curiosity about those who have gone before us and the lives that they lived. It's a truly fantastic collection, published by MacIntyre Purcell Publishing Inc, whom we're very thankful for helping to put on this event, and of course, for publishing this book in the first place. I'm going to point out that after the presentation from Christine, there'll be time for questions from you out there in the audience. So please, over the course of the evening, as questions occur to you, and I'm sure there will be some, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A box, which is right at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you put questions in there, you won't interrupt the flow, we won't be notified, but we will be able to see them once it comes time to interrogate Christine about the history of Winnipeg and the beautiful photographs contained within this book. Before I introduce Christine, I just wanted to read two very quick and wonderful things that have been said by local luminaries about this book. Dr. Gordon Goldsborough, president and head researcher of the Manitoba Historical Society, says, "In this remarkable book, we discover a diverse range of things, from opera houses to hotels, from bridges to parks, that were once vibrant and active, but are now largely lost to memory. By sharing with us some previously unpublished photos and the stories that they tell, Christine Hanlon does a marvelous job at rescuing these sites from obscurity and reminding us of what is so much fun about history." And Danny Shore, the composer, producer, and co-writer of Stand, the movie musical, says, "Christine Hanlon is a Manitoba treasure. She recognizes the value of place and the beauty of belonging. In Old Winnipeg, A History in Pictures, she shows us, with many pictures seen for the first time, the Winnipeg we cannot see with our eyes, but that we know to be resident in our deep collective memory. Every Winnipegger should own this book," which is a solid way to end, particularly if there's a bookseller hosting your book launch. But tonight, Christine Hanlon is the best-selling author of Out of Old Manitoba Kitchens and co-author of the Manitoba Book of Everything and curator-writer for Everything Manitoba, the ultimate book of lists. She's here with us tonight to share some of her knowledge and some of her photographs. Please join me in virtually welcoming Christine Hanlon.
Thank you very much, John, for the very kind introduction. And thank you to everyone for being here tonight for the launch of Old Winnipeg, A History in Pictures. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank all the archivists, historians, and history buffs who helped me every step of the way in this true journey of discovery. I learned so much about the history of Winnipeg while working on this book, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Our city's buildings and places have so many stories to tell, and so do the places and buildings we've lost over the years. Fortunately, photographs of this lost Winnipeg still exist. And they're preserved in the archives, but also in people's private collections. I hope the pictures I selected help to tell the story of our city's evolution in a meaningful and engaging way. These are by no means all the places we've lost. But together, they help to trace the period from the construction of Upper Fort Garry, And here we go, we've got a picture of Upper Fort Garry that starts the book, and to the demolition of the public safety building, which happened just earlier this year, and actually probably still ongoing. The photos are arranged according to when the building met its demise, either by fire, the wrecking ball, or a combination of both. So they're a bit like obituaries. Many people have asked me, well, where did these photos come from? Well, I can tell you that I spent my entire winter holiday last year practically living inside the Manitoba archives. Most of the photos come from there. I would arrive at the archives early in the morning when it opened at 9 o'clock, and I'd stay there all day with a short break for lunch. my first order of business would always be to hand over these 5 forms. I would fill them out the night before by researching on the archives website what photos I wanted, and then I would hand them in to the archivist the first thing when I came in, and you were only allowed 5 at a time. So after that, I'd head for table 7. While the archivists were busy looking up the pictures that I asked them for, there I was heading right for table 7. And why table 7, you ask, right? Well, because table 7 was right beside the drawers. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the drawers. There's a card catalog that you're supposed to use to access these drawers that are full of photos. But I never figured out how to use it. So instead, my approach is just to dig. The photos are organized, of course, in some way. They're organized under subheadings. For instance, there's Winnipeg-businesses, hotels, schools, parks, churches. You think of any subheading under Winnipeg and it's in there. And some drawers are full of photos taken by a particular photographer. For example, there's a whole bank of drawers with photos from Albie Foote, an amazing photographer. And so while I was waiting for the archivist to bring me the photos that weren't in the drawers, the ones that I had to ask for, I would spread out the photos that I found in the drawers on the table, on table number 7. Then when I found one that I wanted, I would go and relocate to some dark corner of the archives because I didn't want any glare. And I would pull out my handy dandy portable scanner, AKA my cell phone, and I would reproduce the photo. So until I found out that the archivists were only too happy not only to help me find photos, but also to turn off some lights so that I wouldn't get glare, I sometimes actually took some photos like right under the table. You do anything you have to. And there's something else I should tell you about table 7. It's right by the grandfather clock in the Manitoba archives. And so sometimes I'd look up at the grandfather clock and all of a sudden I'd realize it's 3:55. And here I have all these photos all over the table. And what am I going to do? So I had to put them away for the day. And then I just relocate to the Legislative Library, which is just down the hallway from the archives, because it's open till 5. So as you can see, I didn't waste any time. Now, the great thing about the Legislative Library is that it has information about the places that I was finding in the archives. So it was very great use of my time. And there were lots of books, and the people that worked there were really helpful. And I was able to dig up information about the photos. Of course, it wasn't the only place that I went to find information about the photos. It only had a little bit of information. I also went to the local history room at the Millennium Library. But one of my favorite go-to places was the Manitoba Historical Society website. We are so lucky to have this resource. I just can't tell you how wonderful it is. If you've never been on it and you love history, you have to check it out. And while it's true that a large portion of the photos in the book are from the archives of Manitoba, I did have some other sources as well. I'm going to show you one of those sources in a minute. So some of the other sources were the City of Winnipeg archives, the University of Manitoba archives, the Western Canada Pictorial Index, and this nifty little page called Pass Forward, which is a fantastic collection of archival postcards that somebody put up, well, that the City of Winnipeg has helped to put up. And it's just absolutely wonderful. And people in the private collections have donated their postcards to be digitized for this site. It's really great. And again, check it out if you haven't had a chance to ever see it. So, and I should also point out that a few of the photos in the book were some that I found online, and I found out that they were privately owned. So I had to contact the people for permission to use them. So I'm very grateful that they gave me permission to do so. So the next question that people often ask me is, How did I choose the photos? So my first targets were the obvious ones. By that, I mean Eatons, the old airport. I'm sure some of you will recognize these places. And the old stadium, and the old Winnipeg Arena. So those are all actually photos, I think, that I found in the archives. But as I was searching for these in the archives, I kept stumbling into photos of places I had no idea even existed. Okay, some of them still exist. Actually, that was one of the things. I just didn't know about them. So I had to be very careful because some of I would get really excited about a photo of a place that I didn't know exist. And then I'd find out, well, it's still standing somewhere down in downtown Winnipeg. Okay, so not for the book. But I also found a lot of places that I didn't know existed and are no longer here. And those I was able to include in the book. So one of those places that I want to show you, I'm just going to share my screen again here, is the immigration sheds at the Forks. I don't know if you knew, I didn't know that there were immigration sheds at the Forks. They were located approximately where the Children's Museum is today. You see, at that time, at the time of the immigration sheds, Winnipeg was the real gateway to the West. At one point, all immigrants moving west came through Winnipeg, where they were temporarily housed and processed in these immigration sheds before traveling to their ultimate destination somewhere out west or somewhere else in Manitoba. The sheds were there from 1872 to 1884, and they could each accommodate about 500 people. And speaking of places that could accommodate lots of people, did you know that there used to be a huge amphitheater downtown, right beside where the Canada Life buildings are today? It hosted everything from horse shows, hence the name, to hockey games, to large concerts. I guess you could call it the Bell MTS Center of its day. The amphitheater was built in 1908 during the boom years, when Winnipeg was Canada's third largest city. At the turn of the century, we were an important railway transportation hub with large banks, theaters, and hotels. And that's just a sample. There were so many of them. This here that you're seeing now is the Manitoba Hotel, and it was built by the Northern Pacific Railway. Before it was destroyed by fire in 1899, it hosted people like Mark Twain and Rudyard Kipling. It had its own bakery and artesian well. It was really a very fancy hotel. The hotel was replaced after the fire by the Industrial Bureau Exposition Building, which I used for the cover of the book. And it was the city's first trade and convention center. It also encompassed the city's first art gallery, which was the only art gallery in Canada at the time to have free admission. It also had a very unusual public market, which I found quite unusual, actually. It was showcasing goods from all across the province and the country as well. And I particularly like the moose heads and the barrels, which are quite funny. And if you notice, there's a cure-all for all diseases on the right-hand side of the photograph. So you may have noticed that these two buildings, both the hotel and the Industrial Bureau, were built on an angle to take advantage of the sharp corner at Main and William Stephenson Way, which was formerly known as Water Street. And the architect did the same thing for the Victory Building that stands there today. Some of you might know it as the Federal Building. That's what I've always heard it called, but it has more than one name. I should mention that wherever I could, I noted that the architect, which you can find with the photo references at the back of the book. Now, both the references and the architect, that was something that people that I talked to really encouraged me to. This came up again and again. Please make sure you include the architects if you can. So you probably wonder, like, who are these people that told me this, right? Who did I consult? Well, As I was finding more and more photos in the archives, it became harder and harder to decide what to put in the book and what to leave out. Plus, I began to worry about all the things I didn't even know I should be looking for. So I decided to do some crowdsourcing. After all, the stories and the places we've lost not only live in books and in the archives, they're in the collective memory of people who live in Winnipeg. So then I put out a call to the Manitoba Historical Society's public forum, and I was astounded by the number of responses I got. I mean, that very night when I put it out, they just kept pouring in. Suddenly, I had dozens of new leads. So many of those places that people suggested are included in the book, so I really thank those people for all their contributions. However, sometimes people had great ideas, but I could not for the life of me find either a good enough photo or sometimes not a photo at all. So if anyone out there knows where I can find a good photo of the Winnipeg roller rink, because I really want to include it, or a Canada bread plant on Burnell and Portage, I'm all ears because I've looked everywhere. But asking people to share with me the places they remembered or were meaningful to them made me realize something else. We are surrounded by the remnants and reminders of places that have played an important role in Winnipeg history. Understanding the important role of these places in the evolution of our city gives meaning and context to the place where we live today. It's part of our greater story. I'll show you an example. For instance, I live in River Park South, and this, what you're seeing right now, is River Park. That's what River Park South is named after. River Park used to be near the corner of Osborne and Jubilee, and it was one of three permanent amusement parks that the city had at the time. River Park was built at the end of the line by the Winnipeg Street Railway Company to get people to use the streetcars in off hours. Besides the roller coaster that you can see, and I think you can also see the fun house in there, there was a roller rink, a dance hall, a zoo, a miniature train, and tennis and baseball in the summer, and skating and ski jumping in the winter. The other two amusement parks were Elm Park and Happyland. Here you go, there's Happyland. Makes me happy just looking at Happyland. And I should point out that this is one of those postcards from that Pass Forward website. Happyland, as you can see, was very popular in its day. In fact, on the weekend that it opened, it sold 44,000 tickets. Unbelievable. And Winnipeg wasn't even that big back then, or didn't have that many people. So Happyland used to be in Wolseley between Aubrey and Dominion. And recently I was speaking to somebody and we realized that he lived on one of those streets where Happyland used to be, right in Wolseley. In fact, I used to teach in Wolseley at Laura Secord School. And that school dates back to 1912. In fact, the year that I started teaching at the school, they were restoring the building. So we had to move to a different school that year. That school was J.B. Mitchell. Now, at the time, I didn't give a second thought to the name J.B. Mitchell. Didn't mean anything to me. So you can imagine my surprise when I found out that J.B. Mitchell was an architect who designed no less than 37 schools in Winnipeg, including Laura Secord, during his 25 years as an architect. That's more than 1 year. Busy guy, eh? And then there's the Osborne Street Bridge. Now, I go over the new bridge. This is the old Osborne Street Bridge. I go over the new bridge on my commute from work every day. But it wasn't until I found this photo in the archives that I realized that there's the exact same photo on the outside wall of the Shoppers Drug Mart in Osborne Village. I can't believe that I saw that photo every day for 7 years, but I never really saw it. You can check it out, it's there. Plus, I never realized that the previous bridge was a lift bridge, even though there's a giant yellow gear from the mechanism the lift mechanism in the park right beside the bridge. I'm sure you've seen it. Actually, somebody recently said to me that they thought that it was some sort of modern sculpture, but no, it's not. It's the gear from the lift bridge. In fact, there are remnants all over the city of the buildings featured in this book. In Transcona, for instance, you can find the foundation of one of the 230 buildings that were part of the old cordite plant, where they manufactured explosives during the Second World War, thus then putting the cordite explosive into the shells. What was amazing to me was not only that there was a cordite plant in Transcona, because I had no idea, but it was so big. I mean, 230 buildings, it was spread out over 800 acres. They had to space the buildings quite far from one another because if one accidentally blew up, they didn't want to blow up the whole place. On the other hand, when they decided that they did want to get rid of the whole place at the end of the Second World War, when they didn't need the cordite plant anymore, they actually used 500 pounds of the cordite right from the plant to blow it all up. There's another interesting remnant from Lost Winnipeg that I've seen many times, and you may have seen as well. But, for all the times that I've seen it, I didn't really pay attention to it. And it's inside the Franco-Manitoban Cultural Center. It's the part of the facade of the Empire Hotel. That used to be on Main Street by the railway station. It was also known as the Cochon Block, named after Manitoba's first Francophone lieutenant governor. So it's probably why it's in the Centre Culturel. Then after it was the Cochon Block, they turned it into an apartment building and eventually into this hotel. And then there's the Forks. I don't know if you've been to the Forks recently, but I just discovered that a little while ago that they have all these building shards at the Forks. That's what they call them. And in fact, I recently took the book there because when I first discovered the building shards, they do have a panel there that shows you the building, but it's a really small picture. And then they have a little bit, I think the name of the building, maybe a little bit about it. But it was more fun taking the book and seeing all the buildings in the book that the shards come from. So it was a bit like a scavenger hunt. It was really, really fun to do. So because before I worked on this book, I had no idea that there are pieces of buildings all over Winnipeg, it seems like. Sometimes in places where you least expect them. Take, for example, Mostyn Park. That's this little tiny park close to the Granite Curling Club. I don't know if you've ever noticed it. In it, there are pillars from the old Dominion post office that used to be on Portage Avenue. I drove by that park. Again, it's actually on my way home from work. You're going to think I'm probably half asleep on my way home from work, but I just saw that there was something in that park, but I never really knew what. And then one day I was cycling through the park and I stopped and I paid attention. And there they were. They were the pillars from the old Dominion post office that used to be on Portage Avenue. Another place that I passed by on my way to work is Polo Park, and that used to be a racetrack. And some of you might know that, but I don't know if any of you realize that it wasn't the only racetrack they had in the city at the time. They had one in Whittier Park as well. Here it is. That's the place where they now have the Festival du Voyageur. And the person who built the Whittier Park racetrack was the same person who ran the Polo Park racetrack. It just really never ceases to amaze me how much working on this book has given me a deeper sense of place and context and meaning of all the places in the city where I live, work, and play. A long time ago, for instance, I used to work in the Kensington building on the northeast corner of Smith and Portage downtown. I don't know if you know which building I'm referring to. It's this big modern glass building. But it wasn't until I worked on this book that I realized there used to be another Kensington building at that very location. But it doesn't stop there. That building housed a diner run by 4 Sicilian immigrants who later purchased the adjacent property to build the Olympia Hotel, which was later developed into the Marlborough, which is of course still there today. It's amazing all the connections between things. That was one thing that really delighted me when I was working on this book. As for the Kensington building, it was later purchased by Ernest Chilakas. You might have heard that name. He was the founder of Broadway Florists, very famous florist that's still in the city. In fact, the floral shop was in the Kensington building for a while. But the building itself, this building that you see, burnt down a year after Ernest Chilakas died. And it was his son who built the one that is there today, the big new glass building. So it's funny, I worked in that glass building for 2 years and I had no idea about the stories. Now I work much further west on Portage Avenue, right by the pedestrian footbridge to Assiniboine Park. Did you know that before there was a permanent footbridge there, the city used to build a temporary pontoon bridge every spring, and they used to take it down every fall so it wouldn't get swept away by the ice? That's quite the photo, isn't it? Yeah, I'm actually amazed that that bridge didn't collapse under the weight of all those people, never mind the ice in the fall. I really enjoy working by the park because I get to go there over my lunch hour, and I do that very often. And of course, one of the places that we've lost recently was in that park, and it was the conservatory at Assiniboine Park. As you can see, in the beginning, the conservatory was really just a greenhouse. And then over the years, they encased it with different buildings. And overall, it was there for more than 100 years in one form or another. But in 2018, the city determined that it would cost more money to repair it than to build a new structure. Like me, maybe some of you went in 2018 on those last days when it was still standing to say your farewell to the old conservatory. And yeah, there was definitely a touch of sadness to do that, more than a touch of sadness. But as sad as that was, these days when I go walking in Assiniboine Park during my lunch hour, my spirits are really lifted by the sight of the 2 new places that are going up there, the Diversity Gardens and the Leaf Pavilion. They're going up pretty close to where the conservatory used to be. And to me, that's just another example of how Winnipeg does such a good job at continuously reinventing itself. For instance, some of you might remember the Molson Brewery at Redwood and Main. Okay, you probably don't remember it looking like that. Because before Molson owned it, it was owned by Carling O'Keefe. And then before that, believe it or not, it started life as the Drury Brewery. I mean, what a perfect name for a brewery, right? And that Drury Brewery was started in 1872. It's quite a while ago. Now, it wasn't the only brewery in the city, of course, at the time. Actually, there was a number of them. And one of the other ones was right downtown, and it was called Shays Brewery. And it opened in 1873. I guess you got to keep up with the competition, right? Later on, it became Labatt's Brewery, and then, of course, it was destroyed. They're both gone now, but the great thing is that during the last few years, we've seen all these wonderful new microbreweries popping up all over the city. So just another example of how the city is constantly reinventing itself. Of course, there are some places that we've lost that have hurt a little bit more than some others. And you might agree with me that one of those places was Eatons. And I know I've showed this picture earlier in the presentation, but I'm sure nobody's going to mind me showing it again, because Eatons was something that was pretty near and dear to our hearts, to a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people have memories of shopping there or having lunch in the grill room or the Valley Room. Some people might have had family members that work there, might even work there themselves. I'm sure you have lots of memories of Eatons. It was, for many years, the part of the very fabric of Winnipeg. And as great a loss as that was, and many people have said, there should have been a way to move forward with renewing downtown without using the wrecking ball. I'm sure, nonetheless, that, like me, many of you have been to the MTS Center, to the Bell MTS Center for a concert or an event or even a hockey game. And the city was over the moon when we got our Jets back, weren't they? Plus, the new arena has really been a key part of reinventing downtown. You just have to think of True North Square, that's just come up recently and was all tied to that. And if all goes well, there will be another renewal project downtown very soon, this time in the Exchange District. And that's an area of the city that has been particularly good at reinventing itself, and also at keeping some of its historical and heritage sites, I might say. But did you know that there used to be an actual market near the area we now call Old Market Square? It was taken down in 1964 to make way for the Civic Center complex, which included a new city hall and a police station. And so part of that whole complex at the time was the public safety building and the Civic Parkade. I don't know if any of you remember the Civic Parkade. It was that tunnel that went to the Centennial Concert Hall between the parkade. There was this tunnel. I don't know, I was always really fond of that tunnel. And so now the site is being redeveloped for something called Marketlands. So you've probably seen that the public safety building is in the midst of being demolished. And the Marketlands project is described as a mixed-use development that will combine housing with venues for the arts and market stalls for local products. So I guess kind of bringing the market back to the Old Market Square area. There's a public portal, a public engagement portal online for Marketlands, and I truly encourage you to go in there and give them your 2 cents, because it's still in the works, and I think we all need to participate in reinventing our city. And I was also reading the project vision the other day for Marketlands, and I noticed that they described the concept as a destination where Winnipeggers and tourists alike can experience the best of Winnipeg's past reflected into the future. That really made my heart swell and made me so happy to see this acknowledgement of the importance of Winnipeg's history. And it just reminded me once again how the past, including the places we've lost, is so important to our understanding of our present and our future. It also made me think about how resilient we are. Over the years, this city has faced its share of challenges, and we're certainly facing some now. But we never stop reinventing ourselves and creating a better future. And that future is built on the very past that has made our city so strong. On that note, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and want to tell you to hang in there. Hope you enjoy the book. And I now believe there's going to be some time for questions.
Yes, indeed. And there's an appropriate one from Maura Kenny, I believe, which can start us off positively. And that's Christine. How long did it take you to compile and put this book together? And how did you decide where to start in the first place?
Well, it took me only about a year because I had my publisher breathing down my back. But you know what? Sometimes that's the best thing. That's just what you need, right? And like I said, I really hunkered down and spent all my time in the archives. Now, where did I start? It had to be Upper Fort Garry. It just had to be. Because, I mean, the Hudson's Bay Company has had such a big impact on our city, on our province and our city. And it's just a good starting point, I think. And of course, we still have the gates of Upper Fort Garry in the park.
No, absolutely. Doug was wondering what you regard as Winnipeg's most historically significant building.
That is a very good and difficult question.
Loaded question.
Yes, it's a. Well, I guess I'm going to pick from the ones that are. I guess I'm going to assume that he means the ones that are no longer there, the ones that are in the book, right? Well, again, Upper Fort Garry, I guess I could say was very significant, but I'm going to dodge that question. I'm going to say that each of these buildings has a very important part in the overall story of Winnipeg, and collectively they tell that story. I don't really think we can pinpoint, because we're always growing and changing, and that's what these buildings tell you. So you can't really give one play favorites and say that one had more significant impact over the others. I think they all had their own impact, and they collectively made us who we are.
Absolutely. Christopher Adams wanted to extend his thanks and say that he really enjoyed the presentation.
Oh.
He was wondering if there were any pictures of the old legislative building in the book.
Oh, yes, there are. Absolutely. I can't tell you the exact page, but it's in there. I got a great photo of the old legislative building, which was, of course, not where the legislative building is today. It was, but it was downtown, more on Broadway, I believe.
Mahangel Lloyd was asking about a process that must have been particularly carefully executed, I'd imagine. How did you come to select the first and the final image in the book?
That was very interesting, actually. The first one is, I think I've already spoken to. So I'm going to speak to the final image of the book, because actually the final image of the book was changed at the last minute. It wasn't, the final image I originally had was the Scott Memorial Orange Hall, which I thought was fitting because it was like bookending the book, you know what I mean? Because of course, Thomas Scott was executed by Louis Riel at Upper Fort Garry, and the book started with Upper Fort Garry. So how wonderful to finish, the book with that building that's named after Scott. But then my publisher threw me for a loop, and he asked me for one more photo. And of course, as you realize, the photos in this book are not just put willy-nilly, right? They are put by the date of when they were destroyed. So I had to find a building that was destroyed this year. So talk about a challenge. So interestingly enough, it was the public safety building that I realized was being destroyed. And it ended up being the perfect picture, the perfect place, the perfect photograph, because it's historical, not only because it was built as part of the new civic center when we built the new city hall, but it's built on land that was granted to the city in 1875 for $600 by the children of the Red River Settlement's first postmaster. So it does tie back to the beginning, but at the same time is going to be turned into the market lands, which harkens to the future, which speaks to how we're moving forward. And I thought, how perfect is that?
The ideal note to end a book on.
Yeah.
So 2 fire-related questions, actually. The first is from Ajael Gellis. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing anybody's last name, who was wondering, so many buildings burned. Was Winnipeg ever in danger of a great fire that might have endangered downtown? And to tie into that, Oliver Hanlon was wondering why the Manitoba Hotel wasn't rebuilt after the fire.
Those are 2 very good questions. Now, I think that all these fires did prompt the institution of fire codes, the development of fire codes. And fortunately, we have those today, because a lot of people lost their lives in the fires as well. There were people that lost their lives in the fire for the St. Boniface College. I believe people that were at the college lost their lives. And for some of the buildings downtown, several firefighters lost their lives in the theater fire. In fact, we didn't have a fire that engulfed our city, thank goodness, but we did have one that was called the theater fire that engulfed a number of theaters downtown at one time. And I remember actually reading about that when I did my other book, the Book of Lists. And so, yeah, we did have a major fire, but nothing like, the Chicago fire or, so we were very lucky. We dodged that bullet. And I think we did learn from that. And, the fire codes that we have today, we can thank that. Now, as to why the Manitoba Hotel was never rebuilt, I think, again, that speaks to this whole notion of reinventing ourselves. I think somebody saw the opportunity and a need to build a convention center. And at that time, Winnipeg was booming. So it was the perfect time to do it. And it happened.
So Jason was wondering, he mentioned that he appreciates your comment about how it is so important to dig into our past to be able to plan for our future. and mentions that with equity and diversity as big topics right now,
Yes.
did you unearth any stories or histories that we as a city are looking to currently reverse or change in a significant way through the way the city is constructed?
Oh, that is a very good question, and a very challenging one as well. I think we've learned some lessons from the history. I certainly came across some interesting history lessons. One of them was, the Fort Osborne barracks were used at one point to process Ukrainian internments, Ukrainians that were interned during the First World War, and I had no idea. So, that certainly is something. I think we're not using any of our buildings to do things like that anymore, thank goodness. But in terms of equity, I think that city planners these days really need to take that into consideration when they're building downtown. And actually, I think the Marketlands is a good example of that, because I believe if you go into the website and you look at their plans for it so far, they are really paying attention to that. And they're really wanting to make it open to a wide range of people from all social economic levels, so that, and including artists, and we all know that artists are not often the people that are the most well off in our society, but they certainly provide a lot of value. So, I think that the person who asked this question is absolutely right. We have to pay attention to this and moving forward. And I'm glad that people are beginning to do that.
And I was selfishly, personally wondering what the most interesting discovery that you made while putting together this book was. Was there a particular wormhole that opened up for you that, despite your own incredible knowledge of Winnipeg history, really led you down an unknown path?
Wow, there were just so many. Well, I think that what I said about the internment of the Ukrainians I just mentioned was very surprising to me. I don't know how I could not have known about that, and it's just something. There are a lot of things about our history that we don't often pay attention to. We don't always pay attention to. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. Okay, I didn't know there were 3 amusement parks. I know that sounds silly, but I was blown away by that. And you know what? There were a lot of pontoon bridges. Like, what is it with the city and pontoon bridges? there was one at River Park as well, not just by Assiniboine Park. So no, it was I think those are some of the things that were very surprising to me. But I think what was the most surprising to me was all the connections between these buildings. It was like really like writing a story. Like, you have the legislative building, for example. Somebody asked about that, right? And then they built a new legislative building. Well, then you have the Kelly House, and built by a famous contractor in the city. And that's tied to the legislative building, because Kelly, who was building the legislative building, got kickbacks during the building that he funneled back to the Conservative government of the day. So, you have all these stories. Like, it's not just about buildings, or the fact that the building on the cover of the book, right, the Industrial Bureau. Well, that was the headquarters. I didn't know this before I did the research here, for the Citizens Committee of 1,000 during the Winnipeg General Strike. I mean, there's just so many connections. It was really fun. I loved writing and working on this book.
Fantastic. So I'm now going to close with another potentially loaded question from Irene Howard Zubrit. She asks, what's next for you, Christine?
That is a very loaded question. Well, I'm actually doing, I need a break, first of all. I need a little bit of a break. So I'm actually doing some work for MacIntyre Purcell right now, doing some text for somebody else's book. So I'll have to wait and see when that book comes out. So.
Fantastic. So ending on a suitable note of mystery as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you again, Christine, for spending all this time with us and for talking about your incredible book, Old Winnipeg, A History in Pictures. It is available coincidentally from McNally Robinson Booksellers. So if any of you folks are interested in getting copies, you can call us, you can visit us, you can order it online. We deliver across the country, nationwide, internationally, and we can even courier it within Winnipeg if you don't want to leave your house. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here tonight, both here in the webinar, on YouTube as well. This will stay up on our YouTube channel, so if you'd like to watch this again or share it with anybody who wasn't able to make it, please do feel free to share it around. But I'd just like to thank all of you one more time for joining us here tonight, to Christine for writing such an incredible book and for compiling such an incredible book in the first place, for doing all the work to bring us these images of the city that none of us would have otherwise been able to see. And of course to MacIntyre Purcell for publishing it in the first place. So I do hope you all have a lovely night. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you again soon.